Top 7 things emotionally intelligent people do differently. It is not about being nicer. That is the first misconception. People assume emotional intelligence is about being agreeable or warm or good at making others feel comfortable. And while those things can be part of it, they are not the point. Emotional intelligence is not a social performance. It is a set of internal skills that shape how a person processes their own emotions, reads the emotions of others, and makes decisions in the space between feeling and action. The people who have developed these skills are not necessarily the most cheerful people in the room. They are the ones who seem to handle things, who do not get rattled when others do, who manage to stay clear-headed at exactly the moments when clarity is hardest to maintain. Here is what they actually do differently. Number 7. They name what they are feeling precisely. Most people experience emotions in broad, undifferentiated categories. Something feels bad. Something feels good. The internal report is general and imprecise, which means the information the emotion is trying to convey gets lost in the noise. Emotionally intelligent people have developed what psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett calls emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between emotional states with precision. The difference between anxious and overwhelmed, between disappointed and betrayed, between irritated and contemptuous. These are not the same feelings, and they do not call for the same responses. Research by Barrett and colleagues has found that people with higher emotional granularity experience fewer days of depression and anxiety, use less medication, drink less alcohol, and show greater resilience when exposed to stress. The mechanism is simple. If you can name what you are feeling precisely, you can respond to it precisely. A vague bad feeling calls for a vague response. A precisely named emotion gives you a specific, actionable signal. The vocabulary of emotion is not decoration. It is a tool for clarity. Number 6. They pause between feeling and responding. Emotion moves fast. The feeling arrives before the thought does. And the instinctive response, the one that arrives along with the feeling, is frequently not the one that serves you best in the situation. Emotionally intelligent people have trained themselves to notice the gap between an emotional trigger and a response, and to use that gap deliberately. Not to suppress the emotion, but to allow it to be felt without immediately being acted upon. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor whose work on meaning and human freedom has influenced generations of researchers, described this as the space between stimulus and response. In that space, he wrote, lies our freedom and our growth. Neuroscientist Daniel Siegel describes a similar concept as name it to tame it. The act of labeling an emotional experience with language activates the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for rational thought and decision-making, and reduces activation in the amygdala, the region responsible for the fight or flight response. The pause is not passivity. It is the exercise of one of the most sophisticated capacities the human brain possesses. Number 5. They take responsibility without self-punishment. When something goes wrong, there are 2 common failure modes. The first is defensiveness, denying responsibility, deflecting blame, constructing explanations that place the fault elsewhere. The second is self-punishment, accepting responsibility, but then compounding it with shame, rumination, and an extended internal verdict on one's own character. Emotionally intelligent people do neither. They take clear, honest responsibility for what was actually their fault, without extending that responsibility into a broader judgment of their worth as a person. This distinction maps directly onto Carol Dweck's research on mindset. Responsibility without self-punishment is the growth mindset in action. What H? A pain is real, it needs to be addressed, and it says something about this situation and what I can do differently, not something permanent about who I am. Research on self-compassion by psychologist Kristen Neff has found that people who practice self-compassion, treating themselves with the same care they would offer a close friend after a mistake, show greater motivation to improve, greater resilience after failure, and lower rates of anxiety and depression than those who rely on self-criticism. Self-compassion is not self-indulgence. It is the most effective available foundation for genuine accountability. Number 4. They read the room without losing the thread. Emotional intelligence is frequently described as the ability to read other people's emotions. And that is real. But what distinguishes higher levels of emotional intelligence is not just reading the room, but being able to do so without losing track of your own internal state in the process. Many people can attune to others, but at a cost. They absorb the emotions in a room and lose their own sense of ground. They become so responsive to others that they lose access to what they themselves think, feel, and need. Emotionally intelligent people maintain what researcher and author Harriet Lerner describes as a differentiated self, the ability to be emotionally present and attuned to others while remaining connected to your own values, perspectives, and emotional state. They can feel what the room is feeling and still know what they think. This is the difference between empathy and emotional fusion. Empathy involves understanding another person's emotional experience. Emotional fusion involves being taken over by it. The first is a skill. The second is a loss of self that often masquerades as sensitivity. Number 3. They express needs directly rather than hoping others will notice. Many people believe that if someone truly cares about them, that person will intuitively know what they need without being told. The failure to notice feels like evidence of insufficient care. The unmet need becomes a grievance. The grievance becomes resentment. Emotionally intelligent people have learned, usually through experience and often through some discomfort, that this model does not work. Not because people do not care, but because people are generally absorbed in their own experience and genuinely cannot know what you need unless you tell them. Research on relationship satisfaction by psychologist Susan Sprecher and others has consistently found that the ability to express needs and desires directly and clearly is one of the strongest predictors of long-term relationship satisfaction. Indirect communication, hinting, withdrawing, or hoping a partner will notice, tends to generate confusion, frustration, and the very disconnection it was trying to avoid. Expressing a need directly is vulnerable. It carries the risk of being told no, or of not being met with the response you hoped for. Emotionally intelligent people have learned to tolerate that vulnerability because the alternative, the long, silent accumulation of unmet needs, costs more. Number 2. They choose curiosity over judgment when others behave badly. When someone behaves in a way that hurts or frustrates, the instinctive response is judgment. That person is selfish, inconsiderate, difficult. The judgment feels explanatory and final. It closes the loop. Emotionally intelligent people tend to hold that judgment lightly and move toward curiosity instead. Not naivety, not the suspension of all discernment, but the genuine question, what is happening for this person that is producing this behavior? This connects to the research on empathic accuracy, the ability to correctly infer another person's thoughts and feelings, which has been studied extensively by psychologist William Ikes. His research has found that empathic accuracy is not primarily a function of how warm or caring a person is. It is a function of how curious they are willing to be about another person's internal experience. Curiosity does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It means understanding it well enough to respond to it effectively, rather than simply reacting to its surface. The person who moves from judgment to curiosity is not being soft. They are being strategic. And they are frequently the one who can actually reach the person everyone else has written off. Number 1. They know when the emotion is information and when it is noise. This is the most nuanced skill and the one that takes the longest to develop. Not every emotion is a signal worth acting on. Some emotions are accurate responses to real situations. The anxiety before a genuinely risky decision is useful. The grief after a real loss is appropriate. The anger at a genuine injustice is valid and potentially important. These are emotions carrying information that deserves attention. But other emotions are noise. The anxiety triggered by a pattern learned in childhood that does not apply to the current situation. The anger that is really about something else. The sadness that is a residue of tiredness rather than a response to anything real in the present moment. Emotionally intelligent people have developed, over time and usually through significant reflection or support, the ability to distinguish between these two kinds of emotional experience. Between the emotion that is showing them something real and the emotion that is a habit, a residue, an old response to a situation that is no longer present. Research on emotional regulation by James Gross and others has documented this as a learnable skill, one that develops with practice, with self-awareness, and with a willingness to sit with uncertainty about what an emotion is actually telling you. The emotion that deserves action and the emotion that deserves acknowledgement and release are not the same. Knowing the difference is not a gift. It is something built slowly through the patient work of paying attention to your own interior life. And it is perhaps the most useful thing a person can learn to do.